Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. I hope you enjoy. Story number 1. The Grand Champion, written by Sasanic. The tournament had been going strong for almost 5 days now, and almost 200 contestants had assembled in the subterranean metropolis of the Garvak, large-scale covered bipedal reptilians who mined the magma-laced caverns of the underground. They worked in unison with the dwarven cities, who mined the jewel and crystal-rich caverns that the Garvak had cleared with the earth-moving magics. The Garvak had hosted a tournament for any and all aspiring warriors to claim the prize of 1,000 various precious stones after beating the many rounds of pre-chosen champions. As a result, the nearby Garvak and dwarven cities had generated immense revenue, chock full of tourists and travelers who thirsted for bloodshed and the fury of the tournament. King Farthayok chuckled heartily. His 3 chins wobbled and his chest jiggled with joyous laughter. Before him in the arena, the massive form of a Grabaka towered over the broken and battered bodies of 3 dwarven gladiators, limp and bloodied from arduous combat. Grabaka snarled something in his Gravak tongue and swung his massive axe threateningly at nothing, drawing cries of admiration and fervor from the multi-species crowd. Again, the winner is Grabaka, the bloodthirsty! Farthayok bellowed, throwing his arms out theatrically at the crowd, who responded with rapturous applause. The massive Grabak warrior at the arena's center looked up at the king, who gave him a courteous nod. And I believe that concludes today's combat, and in turn the Grand Championship. The crowd's cheers pummeled the king's eardrums, and he couldn't resist but to wince at the sensation. Not yet, sire, another Gravak at the king's side whispered. There is one more opponent left. Oh, Farthayok, he replied. Well, bring them forth. He looked out of his balcony at the crowds. It appears I have been mistaken, friends, for we have a single opponent left for our champion to slay. To this news, the crowd's already deafening cries reached a crescendo, and the very foundations of the arena felt like they were trembling. The king nodded to one of the attendants that lined the arena, and they disappeared into the side passage. A few seconds later, the contestant portcullis rose, and from the darkness within walked a lone figure. The crowd's cheers fell silent quickly, and the sound of all the Gravaks present sniffing the air to determine what this news contestant punctuated the eerie atmosphere. Mumbling of all languages and dialects created a dull murmur as the figure walked towards the center of the arena. The king, too, sniffed the air and let out a surprised gasp. A Landstrider, huh? His voice croaked. Welcome, Surface Walker. You have the honor of being the last contestant of the tournament. The figure, now completely bathed in the light of the arena, looked up to the king in his balcony. The Landstrider, more human as they were known among their own kind, wore a set of thin mail plates that covered their body, and fully enclosed helmets sat on their head. A shoulder cape, the color of bright crimson, hung solemnly from a pauldron, and a plume of similarly colored horsehairs ran from the crown of the helmet down their back. The figure lifted a gloved hand in greeting to the king and crowd, and unsheathed their sword from their hip. Commonly, most contestants and gladiators wore either thick plates of armor or bore massive weapons capable of scaling scores with a single blow. This was the same for humans too, but for their size and strength against any race bigger than them, they tended to lose a lot. The sword that the human drew was not a broadsword or a longsword or even a magic-bound sword, but a basket-hilted sword with a blade as thin as one's finger and as long as an elf's arm. Delicate to look at, and more so to use in aggression or combat. King Farthayok chuckled to himself. This will be quick. That poxy little thing won't even scratch Grabaka. He mumbled to his advisor as 2 warriors in the arena circled one another. He had seen plenty of humans come and die at this very tournament alone, and knew that this fight would be over in moments. My sire, the human has defeated 31 contestants, Farthayok's advisor quietly commented, and hasn't had a blow land on them once. I fear that we might underestimate this Landstrider. Call the fight off until tomorrow. Let Gravica rest fully. We can then poison the humans so that they will be guaranteed to lose the fight and—
Enough! I acknowledge your concern, but I have utmost faith in Gravica,
the king interrupted, ushering away the advisor so that he could watch the fight uninterrupted. The massive Gravic leapt at the human, who pirouetted around and sliced their sword along Gravica's exposed leg. The blade left behind a thin trail of blood, and the human adopted an almost mocking dueling pose with one hand behind their back. "En garde!" the human muffled voice beckoned, enraging Gravica. Again, he leapt and swung in an arc that would have sliced any living being in two, but the human, again, seemingly melted around the Gravic, delivering another slice to the exposed part of the reptile's flesh. The process of swing, miss, drove Gravica to almost uncontrollable anger, and he began to swing and slash with the axe and his spare arm. His attacks random and unplanned. The human dodged and avoided each of the wild swings, and in turn thrust or sliced another part of the Gravic's skin. The king grit his teeth at the blatant display of mockery at the hands of a landstrider, and stood on his pulpit with fury.
"Kill the bastard already!"
he roared in his species tongue, and both the Gravic and human kept attacking one another. With a faint wide swing of their sword, the human made a few meters of space between the two.
"Oh!"
"Of course," the human bellowed back, before effortlessly dodging another swing and plunging the needle-like sword straight through Gravica's throat, making the pointed tip exit through the top of his spine, subsequently killing the massive Gravic instantly. The crowd fell deathly silent, and the sound of the sword being withdrawn from Gravica's throat and the wiping of the blade piercing the silence. The king stood at his pulpit, his mouth silently forming words of sheer amazement. The human sheathed his sword and lifted their visor. The human under the armor couldn't have been older than 20 years, as their eyes shone with naivety. Thin pink lips and pale skin suggested that the human had never seen any form of combat outside of the safety of training room walls. "So, who's my next opponent?" a soft female voice asked, lined with joy. "Anyone else?"
How?"
King Bothyuk's stammered words caught the human off guard, and she raised an eyebrow. "I know. You share my shock and joy, it seems. I think I'm doing pretty well, seeing as I've never actually done anything more than spar with my fellow trainees." The crowd's silence broke as a single audience member rose to their feet.
"What is your name, human?"
they asked. The human turned to the audience member and curtsied. "My name is Cassandra, first-year student of—"
"All hail Cassandra, the Grand Champion!"
the audience member roared. Instantly, the crowd joined in, chanting her name and screaming praises in every tongue that resonated off the walls of the arena. Cassandra hastily turned to the Fathiuk, who now shared his confusion and shock. What? End of story. Story number 2. Rage Beast, written by Chain Blue. The thing glared at Courier. It shook in rage as a malicious rumble emitted from it. Pre-digestive fluid leaked from the flesh-rending teeth of its maw. Courier observed the small beast from behind the barrier. The barrier appeared to be effective, but he still felt an instinctive desire to withdraw into his carapace. It was a terrifying creature, but this was the first time in a Terran structure, and as he guessed, he was determined to give no unintentional offense. As an exercise to order his mind, he classified it in his thoughts. Small, 2, maybe 3 kilograms at most, fur-covered, vertebra, mammal, quadrupedal, relatively large front-facing eyes with round pupils and large ears as well. The nose was out of proportion. Predator. Definitely a predator. It could probably hunt by sight, sound, and scent. That seemed excessive, likely Terran in origin. Of course it was. The humans probably engineered this thing to be a weapon. He mused as he finished his cataloguing his insights. "Hey, Courier, did you find something to drink in the fridge?" called the human Bob, as he heard, "The game's about to start." Bob looked down at the snarling demon from their side of the barrier and said, "Oh, I forgot that Biscuit was in the kitchen. You should probably stay on this side of the baby gate," noted Bob as he stepped over the barrier,
Chihuahuas can be a little arseholes, Bob explained as he scooped the tiny rage beast. Bob brought the death machine named Biscuit to his face and cheerily cooed. Who's a little arsehole? You are! Yes, you are! Yes, you're my little biscuit arsehole dog! End of story.
I would quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and Patreons. Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Barky, Lord Azrakal, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Dragzoon WRE, Holly's Sister, Arcadian. Thank you very much.